Let your breath slow and taste the cold, mineral dark of a spring that has waited since before your first ancestor learned to kneel. You are on an island now, though you do not remember walking there, and the sea around this island is the color of old iron left out in the rain. The year is somewhere near the close of the 1st century, and a man has been sent here to grow old in exile, a man whose name has nearly been eaten by time. He sits inside a cave on the island of Patmos, and the cave smells of salt and lichen and the slow dust of stone. His hands are folded, his eyes are closed, and inside his mind, a trumpet is about to be blown. You are allowed to sit beside him. No one will see you. No one in the long corridor of history will ever know you are here. This is a private unveiling, a book that was never meant for crowds, a folded letter once sent to 7 small and frightened congregations huddled along the coast of Asia Minor. Rome is heavy above them, heavy as a stone lid upon a sealed jar, and these small communities believe that something older than Rome is about to speak. And it speaks now, in the silence, in the cave, in the mind of the exiled old man. 7 figures stand in a line across heaven, and each of them holds a trumpet. 6 of those trumpets are still waiting to sound. The 3rd trumpet is the one we have come for. The 3rd trumpet belongs to a star that has a name, and the name is Wormwood, and the name is older than the book you are about to hear. Listen now, without rushing. There is nothing in this story that needs to happen quickly. A great light begins to fall. It does not race. It does not tear across the heavens in the way later painters would one day imagine. In the text itself, it simply falls, blazing like a torch carried downward by a slow and deliberate hand, as though the heavens were a ceiling of black water and a lantern had been lowered through its surface. It is aimed, not at the sea, not at the oceans, not at the great salt expanses that mariners feared. It is aimed at something smaller and more intimate. It is aimed at the fresh water, the rivers, the springs, the hidden arteries that run beneath the soil of the world. You are drifting now beneath the sound of a trumpet that will take 2,000 years to finish sounding. Feel how strange this target is. The oceans are vast and impersonal, and a catastrophe upon the sea can be romanticized from a safe distance. But rivers and springs are where your ancestors knelt to drink. Rivers and springs are where children were carried to be washed. Rivers and springs are the quiet veins of every village, every monastery, every sleeping hamlet that ever trusted the earth to keep its word. And it is into those veins that the burning star is allowed to descend. The word wormwood is not a word this book invented. It is a word already stained when the 3rd trumpet finds it. In the older scrolls of Israel, in Deuteronomy, wormwood is the root that grows quietly in the heart of a people who have turned away, a poison hidden inside worship itself. In Amos, the word appears again, and this time it is justice that has been turned bitter, justice soured in the mouth of a court that no longer cares. In Jeremiah, the word is poured into the water of a rebellious nation, and the nation is made to drink the consequence of its own forgetting. Wormwood, in the memory of Hebrew Scripture, is the taste of a covenant that has been betrayed. It is the flavor of beauty curdled. It is the small, green, silver-leafed plant whose oil is so bitter that a single drop can ruin a cup. So when the trumpet sounds, and the star falls, and the name of the star is spoken aloud, you are not hearing a new thing. You are hearing an old thing that has finally climbed into the heavens. You are hearing a word that once described a poison inside worship, now returning as a poison inside the waters of the world. You are hearing the taste of betrayal, rising from the soil of the nations until it reaches the sky, and then falling back down with fire to settle into every well and every brook. There are those who will tell you that the Book of Revelation is a simple forecast of a future disaster, a kind of bulletin. That is not how the book was read in the candlelight of the first centuries. The earliest hearers of this text understood it as a vision, a symbolic unveiling meant for a community crushed under the heel of an empire, and the heavens it described were layered and strange. The star that falls is also a sign. The poisoned water is also a sentence. And the stillness that follows, the small, dreadful stillness after the burning torch has completed its descent, is the sound of a cosmic court closing its doors upon an old verdict at last carried out. Rest in that stillness with me now. There is no need to move. The trumpet has sounded. The star has begun its slow fall, and the world beneath it is still, for the moment, unaware. Above, the vault of heaven is black as a pearl held too long inside a closed hand. Below, the rivers run the color of molten relic gold, the color of firelight passing through old amber. And between those two colors, between the unreadable black above and the gentle gold below, a single bitter name is drifting downward, preparing to find the water. Before the star finishes its fall, before you watch the water change color, you need to understand where this image truly comes from. The Book of Revelation did not invent a burning star from heaven. Revelation only gathered up a much older flood of vision and set it burning at the end of one small scroll. The world behind this vision is wider than most churches ever admitted, wider than most libraries ever held. And to feel the full gravity of what is falling, you must drift backwards with me for a little while. Through centuries you were never taught in any classroom, into a forgotten river of books that kept spilling out of Israel in the last 300 years before the Common Era. Picture a low stone desk in a cave above the Dead Sea. Picture a man bent over a scroll by the low orange flame of an oil lamp, his beard silver, his knuckles stained with old ink. Outside, the cliffs rise in pale layers the color of bone and ash. Below, the salt water sits heavy and unmoving, too thick for fish, too bitter for any living thing. Inside the cave, a small community of scribes is copying books that most of history will try to lose. They are copying the Psalms, yes, and fragments of prophecy, yes, but they are also copying something stranger. They are copying the Book of Enoch. And in Enoch, the stars are not only objects, the stars are beings. Let that sit inside you for a moment. In this world, the pinpoints of light above your head are not distant suns or quiet lamps hung in a dome. They are living things under orders, marching nightly through their appointed gates. And some of them have rebelled. Some of them have stepped out of their paths, abandoned their watch, descended into places they were forbidden to touch. For this crime, in the vision Enoch receives, those rebellious stars are bound and thrown into a prison at the furthest edge of heaven and earth, a place the text itself describes as narrow and deep and desolate and dark. There, the disobedient lights are kept. There, they burn faintly in their own darkness, waiting for a final accounting. Lie still, and let the bitterness of old waters pass through you like a slow, unhurried tide. You can feel how this older scroll presses against Revelation from behind. The falling star named Wormwood is not simply a random rock drifting out of empty sky. In the symbolic language of these texts, a star that falls is a sign that something in the heavenly order has broken rank, and the consequences of that broken rank arrive on the surface of the earth as poison and dread. The cosmos is not a machine. The cosmos is a court, and sometimes the court exiles its own members down into the lower places of creation. Picture now another scribe, many years later, in another quiet room, writing in the voice of a man named Ezra. In the little book we now call 4 Ezra, the world is ending in a different way. Stars fall from their places. The sea moves in ways the sea should not move. Wisdom itself is delivered as a fire-colored drink poured out into the writer's hand. And when he drinks it, he is given the strength to compose 94 books. But listen to what he does with those 94. He publishes only 24 to the people, the ones the common world is allowed to hold. The remaining 70, he says, are to be kept back, reserved for the wise, for the ones capable of carrying heavier knowledge. 70 books held in reserve, 70 doors left closed. You can feel, even lying here in the dark, the peculiar gravity of that number. Somewhere in the imagination of these ancient communities, a hidden library was understood to exist, a collection of writings that the ordinary crowd was not permitted to open, writings held back for another age. The apocalyptic mind did not assume it possessed the whole picture. The apocalyptic mind assumed that most of the truth had been placed behind a quiet and deliberate veil. This is the soil in which revelation grew. Not a single, clean, obvious prediction, but a wide, humming field of forbidden imagination, stars that walk, stars that sin, waters that rise up from beneath the earth through 7 sluices, fissures that split the ground like a mouth opening, and a final accounting descending from the black vault of the heavens. Revelation is what survived. First Enoch is what was nearly lost, carried forward mostly inside the churches of Ethiopia while the rest of Christendom quietly let it fall away. 4 Ezra is what lingered at the edges, kept in appendices, shelved among the doubtful books. The Dead Sea Scrolls are what was hidden in clay jars inside the cliffs above a salt sea, sealed in darkness for almost 2,000 years, until a boy looking for a lost goat threw a stone into a cave and heard something break. Do you feel the shape of it now? A slow, quiet narrowing. A vast chorus of apocalyptic voices reduced, over centuries of councils and quiet decisions, to a single canonical book, while everything else that once stood beside it was moved to the margins, to the footnotes, to the unread shelves. It was not one grand act of censorship. It was something more patient than that. It was 1,000 small choices in 1,000 small rooms, made by men who honestly believed they were protecting their people from more than they could carry. And so, the wormwood you inherit is only the last visible tooth of a much older mouth, the final surviving image of a vast imagination that once spoke of stars as prisoners, and oceans as living enemies, and hidden drinks that let a man write 94 books in a single unbroken week. None of this was permanently destroyed. It was simply moved behind doors. It was simply filed under doubtful. It was simply left off the table. And you, resting here, are one of the few who has ever been invited to sit quietly beside those doors for a little while, and to listen to what the vast and melancholy apocalyptic world sounds like when it speaks beneath the surface of a single falling star. The world of Revelation did not grow in a quiet garden by itself. It grew beside other gardens, older gardens, in a land where many civilizations had already learned to read their fears in the shape of the sky and in the color of water. To understand why a falling star is allowed to aim itself at rivers and springs, you must drift a little further back with me now, not through Jewish scrolls this time, but through the ruins of empires that bordered them, empires that gave birth to Israel's neighbors and its enemies, and its haunted imagination. Picture Mesopotamia first. Picture flat, sun-scorched plains between two great, slow-moving rivers, and a city made of dried brick the color of weak tea, rising along a riverbank in the land that we now call Iraq. Picture a ziggurat climbing in terraces toward a pale sky, and a priest at its summit watching the stars move with the patience of a man reading a letter. In this world, water is not simply a resource. Water is a god. Or rather, water is two gods bound together. The salty sea is a living mother called Tiamat. The fresh, sweet, subterranean water beneath the ground is a father called Apsu. In the beginning, the Mesopotamians said, these two waters were mingled, and from that mingling the world was drawn. That is a thought you have to sit with for a moment. In their cosmology, the first thing that existed was water that could think. The first thing that existed was water with a name. Now listen to how that changes the weight of Revelation. When a star falls into fresh water in the Book of Revelation, a first-century listener whose great-grandparents had walked through Babylon did not hear only a disaster. He heard a strike upon something sacred. He heard something heavenly falling into the ancestral memory of Apsu. The rivers of earth were not inert plumbing. They were the last, quiet relatives of a primordial waterfather, a water that had once helped shape the world. And above those rivers, the night sky itself was red. Mesopotamian astronomers were also astrologers, diviners, priests. They watched the stars for patterns, and they believed that the movement of heavenly bodies carried meaning aimed directly at human kings and human cities. A comet could sink a dynasty. A new star could mean the god was angry. So a burning torch that leaves heaven and drops into water was, in the older Mesopotamian grammar of signs, an accusation being delivered from the upper court to the lower one. A verdict from above, written in fire, landing in the waters that remembered the beginning of the world. Drift west from there with me now, across the brown hills and olive groves of the Levant, into the cities of the Canaanites. Here, in the cliffside town of Ugarit, tablets were once baked in a fire that collapsed the city long ago, and those tablets were buried and forgotten, and much later unearthed again. Among them is the story of Yam. Yam is the Canaanite god whose dominion spreads across the oceans and the rivers and the lakes and the springs of the underground. Do you hear the strange familiarity in that list? Oceans, rivers, lakes, springs of the underground. The Canaanites had already divided the kingdom of water exactly along the lines that Revelation's trumpets would later address. Yam is not a gentle god. Yam is a force to be defeated, a chaos in wet form, a coiling intelligence that wraps itself around the bones of creation. In the older Levantine mind, the waters of the world were the throne of a hostile king. When Revelation separates the second trumpet from the third, when the sea is struck by one blow and the fresh waters are struck by another, you are hearing the old map of Yam's kingdom divided in two and sentenced at different moments. You are hearing a vision that knows what the Canaanite shelves said, even if it no longer speaks their names. Drift south now, to Egypt, to the long green ribbon of the Nile laid out across the red of desert. Here the water does not rebel. Here the water simply gives life, and therefore taking the water away is the most frightening thing a god can do. When the book of Exodus tells of the first plague, the Nile itself turns to something undrinkable, and fish die in the current, and the stench rises from the banks like a slow illness. The whole civilization is struck where it stands by having its water made unclean. Notice how Revelation learns from that older motif and raises it. Egypt was attacked through a single river. Revelation reaches higher, and through a single burning star, it attacks a third of all the rivers and springs of the entire world at once. Lie still, and let the bitterness of old waters pass through you like a slow, unhurried tide. You begin to see that Wormwood is not an isolated nightmare. Wormwood is the final flowering of a long conversation between civilizations about what water means and what the heavens can do. Mesopotamia saw water as a parent. Canaan saw water as a king. Egypt saw water as a lifeline that could be cut. Revelation gathers all three and says, in effect, that the parent can be poisoned, the king can be overthrown from above, and the lifeline can be severed from a source beyond any empire's reach. And at the edge of all of this, in dry cliffs above the Nile, there is another archive you should know about. In the town of Nag Hammadi, in Upper Egypt, a man digging for fertilizer in the middle of the last century struck a sealed jar. Inside the jar were codices, leather-bound books of secret teachings, alternative cosmologies, hidden gospels, treatises the heresiologists of the early church had ordered destroyed. Those codices had been buried sometime around the 4th century by monks who could not bear to let them burn. For roughly 1,600 years, they rested under the sand, beside the river, while creeds hardened above them, and empires rose and fell above them, and wars crossed and recrossed the sky above them. When the jar was broken, a whole forgotten library of alternate cosmology spilled back into daylight. You are resting now inside the company of everything that almost did not survive. Revelation with its falling star. 1st Enoch with its imprisoned stars. 4th Ezra with its 70 hidden books. Nag Hammadi with its buried cosmologies. Ugarit with its drowned king of waters. Babylon with its thinking rivers. All of them, somehow, still reachable, still readable, still breathing faintly out of the long quiet of the centuries, like a single room where many candles were never fully extinguished. Now let me bring you back to the star itself, the one we left in mid-fall, the one we are still watching descend. The earlier sections gave you the long shoreline of history from which this vision rose. But the vision itself has a texture you can almost touch, a taste you can almost feel against the roof of your mouth, a sound you can almost hear climbing the inside of your ears. Begin with the sound, the trumpet. There are 7 of them in this vision, and they do not sound all at once. They are spaced through the text like slow hammer blows upon a long bronze door. A trumpet in the ancient world was not a celebration. A trumpet was an announcement. A trumpet meant war or assembly or a verdict being read aloud. When the third of these trumpets lifts its long metallic voice, it does not cry out, it calls. It calls in a low, sustained, resonant tone that lives somewhere between thunder and a bell. And the 1st century listener would have understood that sound as the horn of a heavenly court opening its proceedings. After the horn, there is a stillness. Between the announcement and the impact, the book holds its breath. You are invited to hold yours as well. The air above the earth grows quiet. Birds, if there were any in this vision, have stopped. The wind has let its hand down. In that stillness, the old word for awe rises up in you. The word for the breath held before something immense is allowed to move. And then, into that hush, the star begins its slow fall. Look up at it now. Do not squint. There is no need to protect your eyes. In the quiet of a dream, you can stare at anything. The star is not the small white point you might imagine. It is a torch, the text says, blazing like a torch. which means what you are seeing is not a pinprick of cold light, but a great burning thing, a flame shaped like a body, its edges trailing slow ribbons of gold into the black vault behind it. The color in the sky around it is not the blue of day. It is a vanta black deeper than sleep, the kind of blackness that seems to drink the light rather than reflect it. And against that blackness, the torch descends, and its trail leaves no ordinary fire, no ordinary smoke. The trail is relic gold and blood red, two colors that braid together as the torch falls. And then, a little further down, those colors begin to turn to the ash gray of very slow decay. You begin to feel, watching this, the particular hush of megalophobia, the old fear of vast things moving slowly, the shiver that comes when something unfathomably large chooses a single direction. There is no urgency in its fall. It does not need urgency. The verdict has already been written. It is only now being delivered. Then taste. This is the sense the text cares about most. A star has fallen, and a third of the rivers and springs of the world now carry a taste. That taste is bitterness. In the Hebrew imagination, wormwood is the flavor of a specific small plant whose oil is so sharp that you can feel it behind your eyes, a flavor that stings the tongue and tightens the jaw and collapses into the throat like cold iron. Imagine drinking water that still looks clear, still pours from the same spring your grandmother used. Imagine lifting the cup. Imagine the first swallow. And imagine a taste that is not a poison in the way we now think of poison. No smell of almonds, no foam on the lips, but something older, a bitterness that says simply, the world is no longer on your side. The water has turned against you. The river has turned against you. The spring has turned against you. You can let that image drift past without fear, because you are not drinking. You are only watching, from the warm, safe island of your bed, the shape of what Revelation's listeners were asked to feel in their mouths. Now layer in what First Enoch gives us to hang behind the scene. The vision of Wormwood lives in a house Enoch had already furnished. In that house there is a prison at the end of heaven and earth, and that prison is narrow and deep and dark. Its walls are not the walls of a city. Its walls are the walls of creation bending inward, black stone folded around black stone, and in that darkness the rebellious stars of an older rebellion are kept like embers wrapped in cloth. When you watch Wormwood fall, part of what you are watching is the opening of that prison, just long enough for a single sentence of judgment to be released into the lower air. Imagine the cold of a cliff whose edge is the edge of the universe. Imagine an abyss beneath it so deep that no sound that falls in has ever returned. That is the architecture behind the torch. Enoch also gives us another image, a smaller one, which I want you to hold for a moment. He speaks of water. 7 sluices, he says, open in the earth, and through them water rises up. Fissures split the ground like lines opening along the surface of old pottery, and the waters of the deep begin to climb. Think of the floor of a cave in which a slow spring has begun, its surface quietly rising against the walls. That is the companion image to the falling star. Something comes down from above, something rises up from below, and the surface of the earth, the thin crust on which your cities stand, becomes the narrow meeting place of 2 verdicts. And from 4 Ezra, drift one more layer of color over this scene. In that text, the stars move in disordered patterns, the sea refuses to behave in its old rhythms, and wisdom is delivered as a fire-colored drink. The cosmos, in 4 Ezra, is growing old, the way a candle grows old, thinning at the middle, flickering at the edges, still giving light but no longer giving the steady light it once gave. When you add that atmosphere to Revelation, the fall of Wormwood is not the sound of a healthy universe being struck. It is the sound of an elderly universe losing one more of its feathers, a feather made of fire, a feather that lands in a cup of water and turns that water to bitterness. So hold it all together now. The trumpet, the stillness, the torch, the Vanta black vault, the relic gold and blood red and ash gray fall, the cold bitter taste against the tongue, the prison of stars at the edge of creation, the slow water rising from 7 sluices in the ground. That is the sensorium of Wormwood. That is the room the text builds around you. And you are lying at its center, allowed to observe it as a visitor, unharmed, unjudged, unrequired to drink. Step back now. Lift your gaze from the cup and the burning torch, and let me show you why this small image, out of all the ancient images, has refused to die. Wormwood survives inside the memory of Western civilization, not because it describes a spectacle, but because it describes a specific kind of horror that is far older than Revelation and far younger than Revelation. A horror that keeps finding new rivers to settle into. The first layer of that horror is this. The judgment does not descend upon something disposable. It descends upon the source of life itself. Fire in a city is a grave thing, but a city can be rebuilt. A plague is a grave thing, but plagues eventually pass. The springs of fresh water, however, are the hidden capillaries of the living world, and if they turn, the entire body of civilization bleeds inward. In the logic of Revelation, the trumpet does not aim for something at the surface, it aims for the marrow. It aims for the bone. It aims for the thing you do not think about when you turn the tap, the unseen flow under every human structure, the quiet assumption that the water of the earth is on your side. When that assumption breaks, something in the psyche breaks with it. A house you cannot trust is one kind of fear. A world whose water you cannot trust is a different and much older kind. The listener in the 1st century heard that, and the listener in the 21st century still hears it, because the drinkable water of the earth is the single most intimate contract any life has with any planet. The second layer is moral. Wormwood is not random. You have already heard how the word was stained before Revelation borrowed it. In Amos, wormwood is the flavor of justice that has been turned bitter in the mouth of a corrupt court. In Jeremiah, wormwood is poured into the cup of a people who have forgotten themselves. Revelation takes that old metaphor, that bitterness which had once been a local image of moral ruin, and raises it to the scale of the planet. The implication is not only that a disaster is coming. The implication is that there is a relationship between the bitterness inside a civilization and the bitterness of the waters it must drink. Sin, in this grammar, does not merely invite punishment. Sin curdles the cup itself. The rot at the heart of a people is said to find its way in time into the very spring that feeds them. You do not need to believe this to feel it. You only need to notice how unsettlingly the logic fits the world you already live in. A world where the decisions made by small rooms of powerful men do sometimes, after many years, show up in the taste of a river downstream. Revelation simply tells that quiet truth at cosmic volume. The third layer is philosophical. Wormwood refuses the modern comfort of a neutral sky. In the older apocalyptic imagination, heaven is not a blank ceiling above the earth. Heaven is a court, a theater, a country of living signs. The lights you see at night are not only physics, they are, in this thought, also witnesses, also agents, also beings with assignments. So when one of them falls into the rivers of earth, the event is not a meaningless piece of geology. It is a decision taken somewhere above, registered somewhere below. In that view of the cosmos, humanity lives beneath forces it cannot negotiate with, predict fully, or master. The sky can reveal, the sky can judge, the sky can invade. The sky can simply choose without explaining. And there is nothing the farmer, the emperor, the priest, or the philosopher can do to reverse a sentence once it has been handed down. That is the philosophical weight of the third trumpet. It places the listener in the posture of all finite beings beneath a vaster order, the posture that every old religion understood instinctively and that the modern world has largely trained itself to forget. The fourth layer is political. And this is the layer the book of Revelation almost certainly felt most intensely in its own hour. Its first audience was a collection of small, squeezed, watched, sometimes persecuted communities under the shadow of Rome. And the one message the book seems to carry quietly behind every image is the observation that empire cannot save you. Rome had brought roads, aqueducts, law, and the appearance of permanence. Rome was the thing that filled the visible world. And Revelation insists, with its 7 seals and 7 trumpets and 7 bowls, that the visible world is only the skin of a deeper order, and that no aqueduct, no emperor, no army can secure the water of the earth if the heavens decide otherwise. Wormwood, in that frame, is a message aimed at imperial confidence. It says, very quietly, that the drinkable water which holds a civilization upright is not under the jurisdiction of Caesar. That was its political charge in the first century. Its modern reflections are more troubling. In the last 100 years, a series of events has made the old image feel strangely contemporary. Scientists who model the impacts of large asteroids note that a direct strike would not only deliver immediate destruction, it would release delayed hazards into water systems, acid into the air, and downstream chemistry into the rivers of continents. Studies conducted in the years after the reactor at Chernobyl opened its invisible wound have traced, quietly and carefully, the movement of radioactive particles through the rivers and reservoirs and fish of Eastern Europe, and the name of that place, in the languages of its region, carries in it the plant name from which wormwood itself was translated. None of this proves that Revelation is a forecast. None of this should be misused as prophecy turned into headline. But you can see how the old image now has a dark mirror standing opposite it. A great star, blazing like a torch, poisons a third of the rivers. And in our own century, invisible elements released by machines we built have done something that, from a distance, wears the same silhouette. Wormwood no longer needs to be proven. Wormwood already works as a metaphor, even for those who no longer believe in trumpets. That is why the image refuses to die. Because the specific fear it points to, the fear that the fountains of the world can turn against us, is not a superstition. It is a possibility we have trained our own hands to rehearse. And yet, lying here in the soft dark, you are permitted to hold that possibility at arm's length, as a traveler holds a piece of very old glass up to the lamp, not to be cut by it, only to watch the small shapes inside it catch and release the light. Before I let this room close, there are smaller doors you should know about, side passages that open off the main corridor of Wormwood's lore. They do not shake the foundations of what you have already heard, they only thicken it and thicken it further until the whole field of imagination around this single falling star grows quietly denser in the dark. The first is a correction worth holding in your hand like a cold coin. Wormwood does not poison the oceans. That line has been repeated so often in popular retellings that it has begun to sound true. But the text is very precise. The second trumpet of Revelation strikes the sea. A mountain of fire is cast upon the salt waters, and a third of the creatures of the sea die. That is a separate event. The third trumpet, the one we have spent this long night with, reserves its fall for something more intimate, for the fresh rivers and the springs and the hidden freshwater arteries. This is not an accident of translation. It is the vision's own architecture, which carefully separates the body of salt from the body of sweet and visits a distinct verdict upon each. The second door leads to language. In the region where the reactor at Chernobyl stood, the word Chernobyl itself refers to a plant, a member of the Wormwood family, a bitter green herb that grows quietly on disturbed soil. The name meant black weed long before the reactor ever carried it into the news. This is not a prophecy fulfilled. This is a much stranger thing. It is a coincidence of language that seems to have been waiting inside the landscape for centuries, before the machines arrived to make it speak. When the accident happened, the word was already in place, already ready, already the correct word. The earth of that region had been wearing its name like a small sign hung on a door, and when the door opened, the name simply walked through. The third door leads back to 1st Enoch. Some readers of Revelation, quietly and without disturbing anyone, have suggested that Wormwood may not be only a rock. In the apocalyptic mind, a star is never merely astronomy. A star can be a being, under an assignment, bound to a task. 1st Enoch shows us transgressing stars being tied and cast into their dark cell. Revelation does not say, in its own words, that Wormwood is a living creature. But the shape of the image, the named star, the descent, the action taken upon the waters of the world invites an older reading in which the falling thing is not a piece of debris, but a sentenced messenger, a single burning servant dispatched to carry out one line of a larger verdict. You can hold that reading, or you can leave it. Both are welcome inside the room we are sitting in. The fourth door opens into the hidden book tradition of 4 Ezra. Remember the 94 books written by the fire-colored drink. 24 were shared with the people. 70 were kept back, reserved for the wise. That single image is the root of every rumor you have ever heard about a secret library beneath a church, a buried gospel, a forbidden codex, a manuscript that changes everything. Every one of those rumors, whether or not any of them contain literal truth, is drinking from the same old cup. The apocalyptic world seems to have decided, long ago, that most of what mattered was kept elsewhere, in reserve, behind a door marked for another age. And the final door is the quietest one, and perhaps the truest. There was no single council that removed a lost Wormwood prophecy from the canon. The actual shape of history is less dramatic and more patient. Over many centuries, across many quiet rooms, a larger apocalyptic library was slowly narrowed into a smaller canonical one. Revelation stayed. Enoch was carried mostly by the churches of Ethiopia. Nag Hammadi was buried. The Dead Sea texts were sealed in jars. The narrowing was not a single hand closing a single book. It was 1,000 small decisions that together left us with only the last visible tooth of a much older mouth. Close your eyes once more and sink below the surface of every river that has ever remembered a falling light. The cave on Patmos is empty now. The scribes of Qumran have laid down their pens. The sealed jar of Nag Hammadi has returned to the silence of the upper Nile. The ziggurats of Babylon have dissolved into the flat brown plain. The walls of Ugarit have softened into their own hill. The trumpet has finished sounding, somewhere very far away, and the sound has traveled out through 2,000 years and landed, at last, in the quiet of this room. The star called Wormwood has long since completed its fall, and the rivers it touched have, in their own slow way, found their peace again, as all waters eventually do, whether bitter or sweet. You are in your bed, and the water in the cup on your night table is clear, and the glass around it is ordinary, and the taste of your own mouth is your own. Outside your window, whatever rivers run through your city are running as they always have, under the same patient moon that watched over Patmos and the buried jars of the desert. Nothing is falling tonight. Nothing is being announced. You are safe inside the small shell of your own slow breathing. What would a river tell you if you could lean close enough to hear the language it has been speaking all along? The heavy doors of the Apocrypha vault will remain open, in their own quiet way, for the nights when you wish to return. But tonight, you owe none of it anything further. Let the last of the torchlight dissolve into the gold of your own warm dark, and rest inside the long, soft, unhurried stillness that comes after every verdict has finally been carried home.